brings the greatest risk. Of course, you need to put it in the context of what the application does. Another thing you can do with it is to map each entry with what is being done in your organization. We want to try to figure out if the combination of all the things you're doing and the education and the libraries you're using and so forth allow you to prevent all of those weaknesses. So can you catch all occurrences of those weaknesses? So you could do code scanning, you could choose architectures, you could have code and design reviews, you could have a lot of testing, for example, fuzzing, or use random inputs and try to get the application to go into a state where that's unexpected, a state that's inconsistent. Maybe the application stops executing, or maybe strange things happen. It gives information, reveals information to attackers, and so forth. For example, Microsoft has mapped the CWEs to what they're doing in the SDL, right? That's what they call the security development life cycle. So, for example, about buffer overflows, buffer copies without checking the size of the input, they have educational material about that. They have a manual process that should catch them. They also use libraries that they design to be resistant to that, and also take care of the little details, making sure that when you do string manipulations, you're not going to overflow the string buffer. And so on for all the different weaknesses. And your goal, of course, is to make sure that there is one of the processes you're using that is going to catch the weakness. If you want more details about that, you can go on Michael Howard's site. So this year we got some tweaks to the CWE as a result of making the top 25 list. We got new entries created. The hierarchy was changed a little bit. We added a link, making CSRF an authorization problem, not just an authentication one. So there's nothing like using something you make yourself to find issues in it. The advantages of this new format we have a more consistent level of abstraction. We have an increased number of more precise, actionable weaknesses. We have customization for different classes of user with profiles. We have a lot more help and material around each of the weaknesses, and we have tables and guidance. If you take this new top 25 list, it's almost a crash course. It's like a crash course in secure programming. So it's a very helpful resource if you have new hires. You may want to get them to pay attention to it. So in conclusion, that was a much greater effort than last year. I think the list is going to be more useful for risk assessments. And we also found a lot of things that need improvement, such as getting data for prevalence. So that's it. We have time for a number of questions. Yes, Spaff?
So this list has been done in some form for several years now.
No, this is the second year.
Well, there was one before that just SANS did, right? That they're.
Yeah, they had a top 20 list. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious whether anybody sort of looked at the trending over that to see if things that have been identified several years running as high priority problems are becoming any less prevalent, or are we still seeing them? As a matter of, are these lists doing any good?
So you're in a way asking if the list has had the measurable effect on the types of vulnerabilities that are found and the mistakes people do. One problem we have before being able to answer that is the issue of measuring prevalence. As I mentioned before, people don't report things as being at the same level of abstraction in the CWE if they're even using the CWE. Going back over the years would be a gigantic effort in categorizing incidence data for each of the types of weaknesses. So I'm afraid that at this time we don't have the answer to that. However, it's something that is very interesting and something that I've thought a lot about. So if we can get the measurement of prevalence more standardized, that will be a great help. However, you can already see that you can see some of the changes by which entries disappear and which are included. It's a little bit risky to try this direct comparison because the criteria have changed year by year, going from SAS to the first year of the CWE and the second year. But if we go back to some slides back, I've highlighted the weaknesses that were not there in last year's. Those that are in italics were not there last year. So at a rough level, you can see how some of the changes happen.
Well, just to explain, the reason I asked the question is that it's obvious a great deal of effort has been put into this. And there's also been a push by, primarily through SANS, I think, but trying to get contract language written or even government legislation requiring that the companies not be held liable if these top vulnerabilities show up in their code, or forcing schools to teach these in the programming curriculum. And I'm just curious if there is any hard evidence that any of that would do any good, if any of this effort or these requirements actually have had a measurable impact or would, or whether there'd just be another top 25 that would bubble up to take their place. And I know that's a question you can't answer directly, but that's really at the heart of why I'm asking the question.
Right, right. And really I hope that in the coming years we'll be able to answer that. I mean, we just have anecdotal evidence that it has an impact. For example, all the people talking about it and the interest. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, how do you rank one vulnerability over another vulnerability? So, for example, why would buffer overflow, why does that rank higher than cross-site plus border rate, for example? You said you can't really measure prevalence of them. Is it basically opinion-based or polls or researchers?
Well, for prevalence, we did have some data. The point was that it was not as good as we would have liked it to be. So we do have, from the security vendors, for example, we have data about how often they found those vulnerabilities internally and externally as for consulting. So this year for prevalence, we essentially tried the best we could to merge all of the data in a consistent way. Again, it's not perfect, but we did end up with a rating from 1 to 4 for prevalence. And we also had a rating from 1 to 4 for importance. And then Then we multiplied importance by prevalence. That gave us a score. And if you look at the list, the score is listed also in one of the columns. So you can see, for example, how close two issues were or how far apart they were. So even though the ratings were somewhat coarse, there were many people involved in the rating process this year. So the hope is that by averaging over the ratings of many individuals, we're going to get to somewhere closer to the truth of how these weaknesses should be ranked.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.